Turbo versus naturally aspirated. Which is actually better? Ever since the first Fast and Furious movies, a lot of people's idea of power comes down to one word: turbo. You remember the scenes: big chrome pipes, blow-off valves hissing, someone yelling "more boost" like it's a magic spell. Movies made turbos look like cheat codes. Hit a button, hear the spool, and suddenly you're doing 200 miles per hour in a quarter mile. Meanwhile, the old-school guys talk about NA power like it's a religion. Big displacement, no forced induction. If it ain't naturally aspirated, it ain't real. So which one is actually better? Here's the truth. It depends what you care about. And it's a lot more interesting than turbos are good, NA is old. If you want car content that doesn't treat you like a kid, that actually breaks down why engines feel the way they do, how they make power, and what that means for reliability, tuning, and daily driving, subscribe right now. Because every time you choose a car based only on marketing or movie logic, you're leaving performance, money, or reliability on the table, and that's exactly what we're here to fix. Let's decode turbo versus naturally aspirated. First, what's the real difference? A naturally aspirated engine, or NA, is the purest form of internal combustion. It breathes on its own. When the piston goes down on the intake stroke, it creates a low pressure area in the cylinder. Atmospheric pressure pushes air in through the intake, past the valves. The engine pulls in as much air as it can through that vacuum effect and its own breathing design. No compressors, no extra help, just cams, valves, displacement, and RPM. A turbocharged engine is basically cheating in a smart way. Instead of waiting for atmospheric pressure, you bolt a turbine to the exhaust. Exhaust gas spins that turbine, which is connected to a compressor wheel on the intake side. That compressor forces more air into the engine than it could pull in on its own. More air plus more fuel equals more power from the same displacement. That's why a small 2.0-liter turbo can make as much or more power than a big NA V6 used to. In Fast and Furious movie language, NA is all motor. Turbo is all motor plus a giant hairdryer trying to shove air in harder. The difference in how that feels and what it does to reliability is where things get interesting. How they make power. Character versus numbers. Naturally aspirated engines make power by revving and breathing efficiently. They tend to have smooth, linear power delivery, a strong connection between your right foot and what the car does, and often higher red lines, especially in performance NA engines. You press the throttle and it responds. No waiting for boost, no hit of sudden torque, just a building surge that feels natural, because it is. Think of old high-revving Honda VTEC engines, or a classic NA straight six, or a big lazy V8 that just pulls cleanly from idle to redline. That's the essence of NA character. Turbo engines make power with torque, a lot of it, and often early. Modern turbos are tuned to give big chunks of torque at low to mid RPM. That's why a small turbo car can feel seriously quick in normal driving. You don't have to rev it to the moon. You just squeeze the throttle at 2,000 to 3,000 RPM and it pulls hard. In numbers, turbos usually win. They have more horsepower per liter, more torque at low RPM, and better on-paper performance. But in character, it depends on the tune. Older turbos and aggressive setups can have lag, that delay between pressing the pedal and feeling the shove. Boost builds, then bam, you're hit with a wave. Newer, well-designed turbos have much smoother response, but there's almost always a difference in feel compared to a high-strung NA. NA says, I know exactly what I'm getting, right now. Turbo says, I get more, but I have to trust the computer and the boost to do their thing. Which is better to drive depends on whether you value response and sound or raw shove and easy speed. Efficiency and fuel economy. Why so many new cars are turbo now? Simple: regulations and marketing. Governments around the world pushed for lower CO2 emissions, better fuel economy, and smaller engines on paper. Turbocharging lets manufacturers use a small engine that sips fuel at light loads, still deliver big engine power when you put your foot down, and advertise strong torque and low displacement at the same time. On test cycles, this works beautifully. The engine loafs around at low boost, low revs, and looks very efficient. In real life, though, if you drive with a heavy foot and live on boost, your fuel economy can drop hard. A small turbo engine driven like it's in Fast and Furious becomes a thirsty monster. N.A. engines, especially simple ones, tend to have more predictable real-world consumption. You rev it, it uses more. You cruise, it uses less, but there's no hidden boost penalty. So turbo wins on paper and in light throttle driving. N.A. wins on honesty and simplicity. What you see is what you get. Reliability and longevity, the big question. This is where people get nervous, and for good reason. A naturally aspirated engine runs at lower peak cylinder pressures. It doesn't have a turbo spinning at 100,000 plus RPM attached to its exhaust, and it doesn't rely on forced air, extra plumbing, intercoolers, and more sensors just to work. From a stress perspective, a naturally aspirated engine is usually under less load per cycle than a turbo one making the same power. You want a mad fact? A lot of engines that are turbo today started life as N.A. blocks and then got reinforced, cooled, and refined to handle boost. The ones that weren't properly updated sometimes end up with issues: cracked pistons, ringland failures, stretched rods, cooked valves. Modern turbos are way more reliable than the early days, but higher boost means more heat. More heat means more stress on oil, cooling systems, and metals. And more stress means everything has to be engineered and maintained correctly. This doesn't mean all turbos blow up. It means to survive, turbo engines need excellent cooling and lubrication design. They often need better oil. They really don't like skipped services or cheap fluids. Naturally aspirated engines, especially low-strung ones, can be very forgiving. Miss an oil change? Not good, but a big, lazy N.A. engine might shrug it off better than a small turbo spinning its guts out. That's why so many half-million-mile legends are naturally aspirated. They're simply living an easier life for the power they produce.
Tuning potential, the Fast and Furious effect. This is where turbos absolutely wipe the floor, if you're chasing big power. With an N.A. engine, to gain serious power, you usually need higher compression, bigger cams, better flowing heads, and more revs. All of that is expensive, and it often makes the car less friendly on the street. With a turbo engine, turn up the boost, add fuel, make sure the tune is safe, upgrade intercoolers and supporting hardware, and you're often looking at massive gains from the same basic long block. That's why in Fast and Furious and the real tuning world, turbos are king. You can take a 2.0-liter turbo that makes 250 horsepower and, with the right mods and a cautious tuner, push it to 350, 400, sometimes more, without ever changing the basic engine architecture. Try getting a 60% power increase out of a stock N.A. engine without boost. Good luck. So, if you're a tuner and you want easy access to big power, turbo is your friend. If you're chasing a responsive, pure, mechanical feel, and you're happy with more modest numbers, N.A. is beautiful. Daily driving. Which one feels better to live with? Here's where we leave the dyno and talk about normal life. Naturally aspirated engines tend to feel predictable. You press, they go. No waiting for boost. They sound better in many cases, especially high revving ones, and have smoother, more linear power curves. For city driving, mountain roads, and people who enjoy revving engine and rowing through gears, a good N.A. powertrain is addictive. Turbo engines tend to feel torquey. You don't have to rev them much to move quickly. They make overtakes easier at low RPM, especially with modern automatics, and let manufacturers downsize while still giving you that strong push-you-in-the-seat feeling. For commuting, hills, and loaded driving, that low RPM torque wave is genuinely nice. So which is better for daily life? If you like smooth, rev-happy engines and don't mind using the tachometer, N.A. is romantic and satisfying. If you like effortless push with minimal revs and don't care where the power comes from, modern turbos are hard to argue with. Sound and emotion, the stuff spec sheets can't measure. This is the part the spec sheet never shows. N.A. engines, especially certain V8s, straight 6s, and high revving 4s, have a kind of voice that turbos often soften: the exhaust note, the induction roar, the way the note climbs and changes with RPM. Without a turbo in the way, you're hearing more of the raw engine, the way air moves through it, the way the exhaust pulses stack, the way the mechanics sing at high RPM. Turbo engines can sound great too, but differently. You get spool noise, you get whoosh and flutter, you get wastegate chirps or blow-off valve sounds. But the turbo itself tends to muffle and smooth the raw exhaust note, like putting a big fan between you and the sound. Some people love that whoosh and hiss. It feels like power building. Others miss the engine as instrument vibe of a great naturally aspirated motor. There's no right answer, just what makes you smile. Cost, complexity, and ownership. From a pure ownership perspective, turbocharged engines are more complex. You have the turbo itself, spinning insanely fast, living in a hot exhaust stream. You have extra oil and coolant lines, intercoolers, extra ducting, and more boost control hardware and software. All of that has to work and stay sealed for years. Naturally aspirated engines are simpler, less plumbing, fewer heat-stressed parts, less dependency on perfect boost control. In many parts of the world, that matters. In countries where mechanics don't have access to advanced diagnostics or OEM parts, simple N.A. engines are easier to keep alive. That's one big reason why, in harsh environments, the indestructible reputations usually belong to N.A. engines or extremely low-stress diesels. In wealthier markets with good support networks, turbo complexity is less of a problem, but it's still something you feel in long-term ownership costs if things fail outside warranty. So, turbo versus N.A., which is better? Here's the honest breakdown. Turbo is better if you want big torque from a small engine, you care about on-paper performance, and you like the idea of easy power gains with software. It's also great if you drive at altitude, where turbos keep performance better than N.A., and you're okay with more complexity from more power and efficiency. N.A. is better if you care about response, feel, and a direct connection to the throttle. It's for you if you value simplicity, long-term reliability, and love the sound of an engine screaming to redline. It's for the driver who is okay with less peak power for a more honest driving experience and wants fewer failure points for the long haul. Movies like Fast and Furious made it look like turbos equal heroes and N.A. equals slow guys. Reality is both are just tools, and both can be brilliant or terrible depending on how they're engineered and what you want out of a car. If you're still choosing engines by hype instead of how they actually work, you're missing half the story. And that's what this channel is here for. We break down stuff like this, not so you can win arguments in comment sections, but so you can stop making blind decisions on some of the most expensive things you'll ever buy. If you're not subscribed yet, ask yourself this: how many thousands of dollars have you already spent on cars with half the information? Hit subscribe now, because the next time you're sitting in a showroom, browsing classifieds, or thinking about mods, you'll want this knowledge in your head, not something you wish you'd learned after the engine is already on a lift. I'm GearHead. Every engine has a story, and together, we're going to decode all of them, boosted or not.